we had no mentors. We had nobody. We were all learning at the same time. So all the people in sort of my age group were sort of trying to figure out ways to go in our profession on our own. Today, that's not the case. All of the folks that are entering into our profession now, there are tons of people that have the experience and expertise to guide you. So my first thought would be find a mentor. Find a mentor that can help guide you through where you want to go, what you want to achieve, and sort of help you with that career path.
Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes, an IRONSCALES podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with CISOs, security directors and architects, SOC analysts, and other InfoSec stars so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes. I'm your host for today's episode, Brendan Rudd, Community Director at IRONSCALES, an email security platform powered by AI, enhanced by thousands of customer security teams, and built around detecting and removing threats in the inbox. We offer a service that is fast to deploy, easy to operate, and is unparalleled in the ability to stop all types of email threats, including advanced attacks like business email compromise, account takeover, and more. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into the show. Hey, John. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brendan. Thanks for having me. Greatly appreciate being here. So thank you.
Likewise, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. So we'll get straight into it. So before we dive in, I would love to, hear a little bit about you, your background, and what you're working on these days.
Sure. So I've been in the business, either information security or cybersecurity, for a little over 40 years. My current responsibilities are counselor to the global NTT CISO, who sits in Tokyo, Japan. NTT is a multinational conglomerate, primarily in the telecommunications and ICT space. About $110 billion. I think we're number 62 on the global Fortune 100 list at this moment. Responsibilities range from a lot of different areas, but I'm focused on the enterprise security architecture plan for NTT. That includes 989 companies, just to give you sort of the idea of a size. My secondary task is to harmonize and standardize our security technologies across those same number of companies. I also do a little bit with mergers and acquisitions and other areas to support NTT globally. So that's sort of the where I sit today. I've been with IBM. I've been with a financial services provider. I've been with other telecoms, and then I spent about 20 years in the military, primarily in the intelligence community. So that sort of gives you a little bit of background, and you can find me on LinkedIn.
So I guess it would be a waste of time for me to ask you what keeps you up at night.
Yeah, there's a lot of things right now that are keeping me up at night, including in about 2 days, we have the opening ceremonies in Tokyo, which NTT is a gold sponsor for, and we're providing cybersecurity support for. So, yeah, there's a lot of things globally that keep me awake.
And I know we're going to touch on that later in the show, so I won't give any spoilers. You'll have to listen till the end. So today's episode is a little different, as I don't often get to speak with CISOs of your caliber. And, we have a broad ranging set of questions today based on the most frequently asked questions you get as a speaker. So we have a jam-packed lineup of nail-biting questions, and I'm sure everyone would love to get your opinion on. So without further delay, how are you or we turning back on the economy?
Yeah, so for a large conglomerate like NTT, we're re-entering the economy right now at different stages because each country has different restrictions. And so when the pandemic certainly started happening and all the countries went into lockdown, we went to 100% remote operations across all of our business segments, all those 989 companies. With a few exceptions, we had people that had to go into our data centers. We had, maintenance folks that had to maintain our telecom networks, et cetera. But for the most part, like every other company, we were 100% remote. So now we have to make some decisions about, how many people are going to be going back to the office. What are we going to do with certain areas that can't go back to the office? Do we still operate in 100% remote mode? The answer to that is it depends. Depends on the restrictions of the individual countries or regions. And even within the regions, some of the states or areas within a specific country have different restrictions and requirements. So that's the sort of the physical challenge right now of doing that. From a cybersecurity perspective, we have an opportunity now that we had to go remote. We all made decisions. My colleagues and I, we made decisions from a security perspective to do a lot of very quick integrations, some very quick changes to allow the business to continue working. Now we have to take a look at what we're going to have to do, which will lead into the second question I think we're going to talk about here, what we have to do to support the business moving forward and still maintain security controls. So I think we're sort of addressing this region to region, country to country of how we re-enter the economy and whether we're either going to have offices in some areas or not. From a cost perspective, if we don't have to maintain a specific site and real estate, we're probably not going to do that. Where it makes sense, we will keep offices open. Certainly, we're not closing our data centers. And certainly for our client base, a lot of our clients are moving workloads to the cloud. Whatever cloud service provider we're talking about, we have to support them all. So, moving forward, we have some challenges that we have to address as it relates to our re-entry into the economy. Hopefully that answers the basic question. I know we're going to get a little more detail here.
Yeah, definitely. Great segue to the next question. Speaking of decisions, what decisions did you have to make regarding security controls during the pandemic and even now?
Yeah, so I think some of the biggest decisions we had to make is being as large as we are. We didn't have a lot of challenges with equipment. Being a telecom and an ICT provider, we had equipment on the shelf. So, moving from a desktop, for example, where an employee would come into the office, especially in some of our specific countries like India and even in Tokyo, where the employee would come into the office and work their day and then go back home. They wouldn't be remoting in. Now we had to change that conceptually and provide them with resources, a laptop to access remotely. And the security controls then had to be beefed up. So we had combinations of, different types of remote access. So VPN, for example, you start going from, maybe 100 users on a VPN circuit in a specific geographic area. Now we're talking about 1,000. So we had to make some adjustments as it relates to, increasing our capabilities. And that included, adding new hardware with new concentrators, et cetera. We also had some decisions to make around things like VMware and or Citrix, right? We have all of those solutions within our environment, which ones we were going to expand, which ones we were going to maintain the same. Did we have the ability to do other remote capabilities, other solutions? The answer to all of those are yes. We had to do a combination. We're talking about a footprint of employees in 123 countries. We have approximately 300,000 employees and approximately another, 100,000 contractors and consultants that work. And so trying to figure out what that mix was going to be. It was very challenging for a period of several weeks as we were moving people into 100% remote activity. So the pandemic caused us to make some control decisions. In other words, some of our integrations were stopped, and we had to make some adjustments of, setting those aside or segmenting those ahead of schedule, for example. Our digital transformation actually sped up, where we were applying security controls to a digital transformation activity that we now had to increase those controls. In some cases, we made certain decisions where we were going to accept certain risks, specifically where the telecommunications infrastructure wasn't mature enough to where we could have all of our employees in a certain region be remote at home. And so we had some challenges there as it relates to accessing remote devices or hotspots. Did we have the need to use bring your own device, for example? In some cases, our general policy is we don't use our personal devices to access our corporate network. For example, when we went 100% remote, we had to make a little bit of a change to that and allow certain employees to use their personal devices to access our network, which means that you have to put different security control mechanisms in place to identify that, because you don't own that asset as a company. So those are the kinds of decisions that we have had to make. And we're not alone in that regard. There's those kinds of decisions. Every company had to make some of those decisions moving forward. Now the question is, of course, what do you do when you're re-entering the economy and now you have control and now all these employees are coming back to the office? Do they really need to have remote access? The answer to that is probably no, depending on the culture and the geographic area. So all of those things now have to be re-looked at with a more finer tooth comb. We handled the emergency, recovered, the business continued to operate. Now we have to go back and make sure that what decisions we made were still secure, still ability to control access to our networks, et cetera. And so that's an important distinction. Obviously, not on this podcast am I going to give you the details of that. That would be kind of crazy. But it is something that every CISO now has to reconsider what their security control baseline looks like. Should they take an opportunity as we're re-entering the economy to beef that up in different ways, maybe change some technologies? Those are all opportunities, not necessarily negatives.
How are you addressing zero trust strategies in such a large enterprise? I mean, that must be a mammoth task.
Yeah, I'll just share something. A lot of my colleagues at my level, sort of laughed at me when I took this position and to try to do this. It is a real challenge. And, think about, where you sit today, no matter what job description you might have, but just think if you had 900 plus companies that you had to think about, and now you're driving towards a zero trust architectural design that all of those companies have to plug into in some way, shape, or form. Each of those companies has a different operating model. Each of them has a different business that they're moving forward. Each of them are different sizes. Our smallest office, I think, is 25. Our smallest company is 25 people, employees. Our largest, several thousands, right? 60, 70, 80,000 people in a single business organization. So when you start taking a look at it, the first thing that I think, as a point of reference for everybody listening to this podcast is that you have to have an architectural plan. You have to create a North Star. You have to understand where you want to go. Zero trust does not happen by switching a switch, to the on position. And it's not all about technology. It's about process. It's about policy. It's about the employee themselves. It's about the supply chain. There's all kinds of things that are impact. So our approach is an enterprise security architecture plan, which we've created. Now we're beginning to implement that. And how we're implementing that really is around developing reference architectures with certain patterns that we identify are critical for the businesses, plural, to operate in. And those reference architectures and patterns, we are taking one by one, and we're implementing those in sort of a methodic implementation process, if you will. And I think that's important for everybody that's considering moving to zero trust to think about. It is not, one size doesn't fit all. And second, you have to take this in small steps. This is not a big bang theory implementation strategy. And I think my colleague, Mr. Kendervach, the owner of Zero Trust, if you will, from a strategy, the innovator of that, would agree with that perception.
Yeah, and I would like to maybe just go a little bit deeper, but without going too much in the weeds. But most people I know would say you cannot implement the zero trust after the fact. Like if it wasn't deployed or if it wasn't built in at inception, you cannot really ever achieve that. So I'm just curious on what you can achieve at such a huge enterprise.
I think the answer to the question of whether we will achieve 100% zero trust is probably a no. Your colleagues probably would say that you have technology debt, you have legacy equipment that will not be able to meet zero trust minimum requirements, right? Identity, you've got multiple directory structures you have to worry about. And identity is a cornerstone of zero trust. So the answer to the question is that I don't think you can attain zero trust if you already have all of these environments already established. But the goal is to break down these environments, create new environments from scratch using a reference architecture that incorporates all the security controls, mechanisms, and technologies and processes as you rebuild that. So one of the things that a CISO should look at almost immediately, if you're involved in or preparing for or even in the middle of a digital transformation, take the opportunity to begin to refresh and move in those zero trust processes and requirements into that design from the get-go. So that solves a lot of problems as it relates to legacy solutions, right? But again, it's a big task. Will we get to zero trust in the next, 12 months? No. Will we get to zero trust in some of our operating companies or some of our companies? Yes. Will we get to zero trust as, all 989 companies in a year? Absolutely not. Is it 2 years? Probably not. Is it 3 years? Depends, right? Depends on what decisions we make in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and just to kind of tie a bow on this, I think many people will also agree that zero trust is an ongoing, never-ending cycle.
It is its own life cycle. It's its own life. And you have to continue to manage, from a security perspective, you have to manage process, you have to manage technology, certainly have to manage people. For us, the supply chain issues are really important because once you open up a connection to a supplier, you have to manage that as a zero trust entity, if you will. That's very difficult to do if you're a large corporation like ourselves, where you have thousands of suppliers that you're relying upon. And so there is some challenges with the supply chain, I think, as well. If you assume that zero trust is your entire ecosystem, if you define zero trust as just your corporate network, which is this little ball of wax that you're worried about, that's a different discussion. That's probably a lot easier to do. But if you're talking about the ecosystem itself, that's really, really hard. So I guess the last comment on this is that, I don't want to paint a negative picture, but for large corporations, it's really difficult to achieve zero trust, but it should be a goal. You should start driving towards that. Create that as a North Star. Put it into phases or different cutouts that you can do at one time. But you can't use the Big Bang Theory. It's got to be a phased approach.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So the next question has a few parts. So where are we going as a profession? What can younger people do to get into cyber? How was it back then? What has changed, and where do we go next?
Yeah, that's like 50 questions at once. I think. Okay, so let me start with sort of how it was back then, since I'm sort of the old guy now. When I started in this profession, first of all, I was in the military, which was a little bit more advanced in R&D at that time as it related to specifically cyber. Okay, wasn't quite in its maturity yet. It was still very much in its infancy, as well as things like the internet was just coming into view. To give you a sense of this for the younger folks, my first computer had vacuum tubes in it. And so, again, I think it's important to look at history from that perspective. Our profession is not that old as compared to all other professions. And so when I was coming up through the bottom, I started out as a basic system administrator for a Unix system and mainframe. So that's sort of where my level of technical expertise started. We had no mentors. We had nobody. We were all learning at the same time. So all the people in sort of my age group were sort of trying to figure out ways to go in our profession on our own. Today, that's not the case. All of the folks that are entering into our profession now, there are tons of people that have the experience and expertise to guide you. So my first thought would be find a mentor. Find a mentor that can help guide you through where you want to go, what you want to achieve, and sort of help you with that career path. All right. And as far as young folks coming into the field, we're starting to see young folks in the U.S. at the middle school level starting to do cyber activities. So just to give you a sense that age group, which was probably, early 20s years ago, is now at, 10 and 11 years old. They're starting out and exploring computer systems, cloud network, via social media platforms, etc. So they're already entering in. The problem is how do you keep them from going down the dark path versus down the white path? That's number one. Number two, is it really exciting? And is there a career? At the end of the day, are they going to be able to support a family, perhaps? The short answer to that is right now and for the next 10 years, the projections are information security jobs are overwhelmingly available. But you don't become a CISO overnight. So a lot of young folks deal with the problem of instant gratification. They want to have an instant feedback, the $1 million deal because they wrote a line of code, right? Those are few and far between, to be honest. And so we have to get them excited about entering in. So young folks should take advantage of technology companies and programs where they have internships that they can get access to doing this job real time and get exposed to it, and how they can do that. Back in the day, we didn't have those opportunities. It was really, really, hit and miss. You could get into an area like, for example, mainframe, which, still there's folks out there that are doing mainframes, believe it or not. There's a small number of those people now that do mainframe security, but it is a talent and they're fully employed, most of them. And now it's a different landscape for security professionals. It's more about cloud. It's more about applications. And so I think that's the change that has occurred. Where do we go next? If you're a visionary to take advantage of yesterday's, sort of space launch by Jeff Bezos, there's a lot of opportunity coming up, I think, in the telekinetic world, in quantum, and in quantum cryptography that I think are areas of interest and will become very important in the future. To get there, certainly you've got to do some study, and you don't just walk in off the street or from writing just very game code, for example, and go into quantum physics, quantum computing. It doesn't work that way. But I think that's where we're going to go next. I think a lot of our younger people are going to start looking at those areas and associating those with current areas like gaming, like application design, etc., to create apps for phones or whatever the next device is going to be, and we have to secure all of that. So security will be around for a long time.
So you also wrote a book on leadership. What inspired that, and what's different about your book on leadership than the others out there.
Yeah, thank you. You did your homework. Thank you for that question. Yeah, I did write a book in 2019. Title of the book is called From Private to CEO. So, over my career, I started at the bottom rung and worked my way up several times to get to be designated as a chief executive officer for a company. And so, once I completed that assignment and moved to this assignment, I had the opportunity to reflect. And I have a lot of young folks through different associations and through the work I do at different schools. And, I wanted to make sure that I provided sort of a checklist and give examples of, what decisions that I made through my career and which things that I made mistakes on. And in the book is designed to have a checklist to help folks understand exactly, where I made a decision at and where I made a mistake at. And the point here is that everybody is different. So just because I did it this way doesn't mean it won't work a different way. And so you have to take your current circumstances. And the biggest thing I can say, I guess there's a couple of things. Networking, always good idea to make a network. Don't burn those bridges once you make a network, because those bridges will come back to you in the future. Second is treat your career as a project plan. Think of goals and objectives that you want to hit, what milestones you have to attain, and how much time you have to have to get there. Because there may be some decisions that you might make that say, I'm going to take less pay, but I'm going to do this assignment because I want to elevate myself to a manager level. But I might take less pay from what I'm currently doing in order to achieve the next level. You have to think about that. That has implications. Do I want to be technical or do I want to be a manager? Those are kinds of things that I tried to identify in the book of where those decision points might be for an individual coming up from, just a basic security position, what decision-making areas they have to or what decisions they have to make in certain areas of their career. So that's what prompted it. I never had anybody tell me how to do that. And there's not a lot of things that are in books that tell you, here's my mistake that I made, right? And so that's why I wrote the book.
CyberSecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/free scan to learn more.
So, in your point of view, are leaders born or groomed, or does it depend? And you didn't have mentors, so would you say you were a natural leader?
I think it depends on first culture, depends on what culture you've grown up in. I've had the opportunity to go around the world several times and live in a lot of different places, including, Japan. And so I've experienced a lot of cultures. Cultures have a very specific impact on you as far as leadership is concerned. Are leaders born? Yes, but they're also taught in some cases. In my particular case, I guess I was more of a type A personality, if we want to get into psychiatric kinds of things, where I knew where I wanted to go and what I want to get done. And then I did have a lot of people take me aside and say, hey, this is what you might want to think about. That's from a leadership perspective. That was not from a cybersecurity perspective, which I did have certain, leaders that helped me understand or shared with me some areas that they had to navigate through. So I did have some help, but I think it's a combination of being born and having a certain kind of personality, but also how the culture might impact your decision-making process. That also applies to gender. certainly in some cases race. So those are all things that, depending on your circumstance, might, have an impact on what your decision-making authority. But in my view, in my world, you have to identify what you want to achieve and what you want to attain, and then you have to go after it. And there's different ways to go after it. And hopefully, most people will take that as a idea for planning your career and moving forward in making the right choices and not making the wrong choices. So hopefully that answers the question. That's a tough question because it really depends on who that person is and whether they were born for it or they had to be taught, or in my case, I think it was a combination of both.
And we don't talk a lot about mid-level career progression. So what, in your opinion, are the options for InfoSec folks wanting to progress their careers? Is becoming a manager, director, CISO, CIO the only career path in order to make those jumps? You talked about project managing your careers.
I think my advice here is that first, not everybody wants to become a manager or a CISO or an executive, and that's okay. I think at around the age of I guess around the age of between 30 and 35 or so, I think most security professionals start looking at making a decision. Do I stay technical or do I go management? Because there's very few people that I know of that can credibly do both at a high level. And so a lot of people have to think about that decision. And that comes with, like, do I do a master's degree in business or do I not do a master's degree at all? Do I stick with just doing certifications or do I take an educational path in university? I mean, those are pretty basic decisions. But if you map those decisions out along a timeline, you can very quickly figure out, if I want to do this, I'm going to have to do these 5 things. And I think mid-level managers generally don't get exposed to that because they're always focused. They're always working hard. I mean, our profession works really, really hard. I mean, a standard, for example, a security operations analyst sits in an ops center and they're face on glass for 8-12 hours a day. And they continue to do that, and everything's a crisis, right? I mean, mentally and even sometimes physically, they're putting a lot of effort. So I don't want to diminish other professions, but our people really work hard. And if you want to be technical, you have to really, really work hard at this because the landscape changes so much in the security, the cybersecurity world, that you have to stay on top of it. So to stay technical takes a lot of work. To lead and manage also takes a lot of work, and it takes different skills than technical. So I think the point here is that you need to plan your career and make certain decisions that best fit where you want to, what you want to achieve, where you want to go. In order to do that, you have to have a plan, in my opinion. And the last thing I'll say about this, which I think is important, is that whenever you start going down the path of where you have to go to work because you need a job, you have to, you're forced to do certain things, you're not financially independent, I think then you don't have fun. And my message to people is try to achieve financial independence where you can have fun, because this job can be so much fun. And if it's fun, then you're mentally prepared. You're not always stressed out. And I think that's been my focus, is to have fun for the last, 14 years anyway. Maybe not so much prior to that, but for the last 14 years, I take jobs or do things that I want to have fun at. Okay. And so that would be my advice to folks.
And what would you say to folks who don't want to get into managerial leadership positions, but they want to increase their salary, their earning potential, because we don't see companies generally incentivizing people to make more money if they're not in a leadership role?
Well, there's different types of leadership role. There's technical leadership for I can only speak from my experience here. I could give you some examples of people that, that will work for me that will make more money than I do. Money is not necessarily a driver for folks, especially in today's environment. I know technical people that have taken less money because they wanted to be in a position where they had flexibility on time to be with their kids, to travel, etc. So they've taken less money. So money has not necessarily been an overall driver, but I understand what you're saying. I think a lot of our technical folks have at least a perception that their base salary, for example, doesn't match up to other companies that do, have other similar technical aspects, or that a business or salesperson makes more money and they don't do anything technical. How is that fair? So that's a perception. My answer to that is that, if you want to make money and you don't think you're going to make the money that's required, then you're in the wrong profession. Change fields. But in order to increase your salary in the cybersecurity world, on the technical side, you have to be technically competent. You have to start making yourself or building yourself to where you are the guru. You are the top of the line. And there's a chart in several places. If you Google cybersecurity professional career progression, you'll see a chart where it talks about the technical bona fides, the technical pieces that you have to achieve in order to reach a certain dollar amount. And then once you get there, then companies search for you. They search for people with this technical background that's very deep, and there's other things like additional compensation or variable compensation that is not about the base salary. It's about what technical things are you going to achieve for that company, and you get paid on achieving those goals and those aspirations. That's where people make money, on variable compensation, not necessarily salary. So the world is changing for the better, I think, for our profession, as people become, the leaders in the field technically, and that could be very focused, right? A person might be, putting their entire career into cryptography and a very specific cryptography set, and now that person is needed in a corporation. They're the best of the best, and therefore they can demand or call for a better salary package, a better variable compensation package. That includes, even the issuance of stock these days, which was unheard of for a technical person, 30 years ago. We wouldn't get stock. We might get options because we joined a startup, but you're rolling the dice on that, whether they go public and there's a payout for stock options. But actual stock now is being offered for people with the tech capability that's needed by a company. So I think you can achieve that. But again, I come back to my first thought, and that is you've got to have a plan. You got to understand where you're going, what you want to achieve. And if money is one of those, then you have to figure out a way to attain that the money that you're sort of achieving. A lot of people are more about getting patents, right? They want all the patents in the world, and they want companies that will pay for those patents, because you can't get a patent, without paying for those up front. So maybe they want their name on a patent. That's not about salary. That's about prestige. So it depends on the individual. It depends on the culture.
Mm-hmm. And coming full circle here, what advice can you give to the younger generation, the entry-level, inexperienced workforce that's dying to get into info security, but they're not being given a chance because of the obstacles being put in front of them?
If I mentor 5 people, so I'll use this as an example, and truly mentoring, you can't mentor a lot of people. If you're doing it the way it probably should be done, you have to limit, because I have a day job. So I mentor 5 people. Some of them are younger folks that I've sort of plucked out of the workforce because I know them. How do I know them? Somebody introduced me to them and said, hey, this person has some potential. Can you go ahead and bring them along? So networking is absolutely essential. And I will tell you, one of the comments that I make to a lot of people is that you got to be on a list, right? What is a list, right? And so whether people want to admit it or not, every executive, every manager has a list of people that they work with, that they respect, or that they would love to have work for them, or that they work for, that they want to work for again. There's always a list floating around. You have to get your name on that list. And I have a list of a lot of people. There's probably, I don't know, 40 or 50 people on a list that I just remember that, hey, this would be a good fit. I happen to have a position open. Hey, do you want to put in an application for this position? The younger people who have not been around yet or haven't been able to achieve that, the best way is starting to build your network. Introduce yourself. Go to meetings of local associations that are related to cybersecurity. Get involved, and people will remember, hardworking folks that want to achieve a certain goal or objective. Always keep your resume up to date, right? And make decisions based on a plan. And so the younger people need to introduce themselves, to talk to people, to get on webcasts, to listen to podcasts like this, to understand who's out there, who are the leaders in our field today, and try to get introduced to them. LinkedIn is a perfect example. Now, I don't accept every LinkedIn, so for the people that are listening to this podcast, don't think you're just going to send me a LinkedIn request and I'm going to accept it. Now, the odds are that depending on where you're asking me from or what you're interested in, maybe I will. But try to get introduced. Try to make that network. Get your name on a list.
So I think we've kept our audience in suspense for long enough. Let's talk about let's talk about Japan. You mentioned 3 days to go, but if we will, go back a little bit, walk us through the build up. What's been happening in Japan with cybersecurity? What are you seeing? What can you share? Of course.
So, I'm going to be a little bit cautious here because obviously the Olympics are ongoing, and we are a gold sponsor as NTT. So I need to be cautious. So, if you want to sort of do some research, you need to go to the International Olympic Committee site to look up what's going on there. So I'm not going to comment on any of the internal stuff that we're doing. What I will comment, and this happens in every Olympics, so just because the Olympics starts at 3 days doesn't mean attack activity has not been going on for months. In this particular case, it's been going on for a couple of years because Japanese Olympic Committee and the International Olympic Committee rolled out the first application for people to worldwide to get tickets. And so that was all handled electronically. So the attack started as soon as that application was online. All right. And I'm not going to single out certain attackers or, things of that nature, but we have been working collectively. The security community has been working on making the enterprise secure and safe for the athletes and whatever visitors are allowed to attend safe. And so that's been an ongoing effort. Now, there's like any other corporation or any other government entity, there's layers of security that have been implemented. I'm not going to describe any of those. Most of us that are in the profession can sort of figure out what that might look like. So I'll leave that to your imagination. But it's been a around-the-clock effort, and certainly from an operations center and a response team effort, we have been on standby for the most part since the beginning of the year for this second round of Olympics. Remember, we went through all of this before it was officially canceled last year. So this is our second round of preparations for this. So for this event starting in 3 days, we actually started that back in January of this year, where we had rotating round the clock efforts that were ongoing.
And working for a Japanese corporation and having lived in Japan, or at least you mentioned with all your travels, you said something like 4 years in total. What could American companies, international companies learn from Japan in terms of cybersecurity?
Yeah, so the major difference, I think, between Western culture and specifically the Japanese culture is certainly attention to detail, right? And that ability to want to achieve 100% quality, right? And that's ingrained at a very young age within in the culture of Japan. And so I think they do that very, very well. So from a security perspective, the things that we have to do around the world in the security profession, the security professional has to be meticulous. Japan is really meticulous, almost to their detriment. And I say that, respectfully because, if you talk about something like a startup, for example, a startup, is looking for not 100% quality issue, especially applications. They're looking for 80%. Get it to market, get it out there, and then make adjustments after, the response from the client base. Do you want to throw something that's only 20% ready out there? No. But there is a difference between 80% ready and 100% ready. And 100% is always achieved by a Japanese business, whether that's technical or service oriented. And that is one of the positive things because it drives all of us to be more meticulous and have more attention to detail. But from a marketing standpoint and getting to market, that's a little bit of a challenge because if they spend all this time getting to 100%, they've already missed some of the competition, right? The competition's already out there. That can be good and bad depending on how your sales teams work, but that is a challenge. So I think the difference is certainly about their drive towards quality.
And the Fujifilm ransomware attack, we saw that they didn't pay the ransom. Would you say that it's a Japanese mentality that we do not pay? It's part of our honor and our pride?
I think that probably has something to do with it. I think it's a business decision, though. Whether you pay ransomware or not is somewhat debatable. Certainly, there's different approaches in Europe. Me personally, if I was advising, boards of directors at this point, I would say don't pay it. Spend that money now that you may. So let's just take just an abstract situation real quick. Somebody had to pay, $10 million to get back online. 5 or 6 years before that event happened, could you have used that $10 million to structurally enhance your defenses for security on your systems and make a better mousetrap? In other words, have your backups really work, have storage really available, have things that, are baseline or minimum baseline security controls in place. You probably spend less than $10 million to do that, but you probably have a little bit of an impact to where the business is going, which then boils down to a risk decision. My view is that we shouldn't pay ransoms. We shouldn't enhance the attackers or the organizations to attack people and pay them, money to, solve our problems. And so that's just my personal opinion. I think a lot of companies are coming to the realization that the investment should be made in fixing the problem sets that they have within their enterprises or their ecosystems and not paying that money in, to attacker that's really, identifying your problems that you already know about. It's just public, right?
Yeah, I think that the incentives and the model is not in place yet. I see it.
Well, I think the incentives are going to become there because if anybody's following the cyber insurance market, that is becoming more and more expensive as a risk mitigation capability. In fact, companies that are able to take an approach where they're self-insuring themselves using their own money versus insurance, I think a lot of companies are doing that to some extent, where they're having a combination of cyber insurance on one hand, and self-insurance on the other, where they're protecting themselves by keeping a pool of money. Now, small companies don't have that luxury, right? Mid-sized, small, medium businesses won't have that luxury to keep that kind of cash setting on the shelf somewhere. And so that's a different decision process. Even some of the large companies don't want to affect their cash flow by keeping, a certain amount of cash, on the shelf to, be a risk mitigation strategy in case they get attacked and they pay a ransom. I don't think that's a good business approach.
For sure. And I know we can spend hours here talking to you, but we want to be respectful of your time. So before we close out today, and I'm sure there are hundreds of questions, but is there anything top of mind that you would like to add that you think we missed?
I think we've covered a lot of topics, Brendan. And so I appreciate the questions. I think I would leave this to, not necessarily my colleagues, because we're already, approaching the twilights of our careers now, but for the young people, this profession can be really, really exciting and really fun. Certainly has challenges, no question about that. And there certainly is a lot of opportunity that is in existence right now and for the foreseeable future. So I would suggest to them that please consider this field. Please understand that there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of things that you can achieve coming up through innovation and through sheer drive. And I think that's important to be a successful individual, regardless of what profession you're in. And then the last thing is have fun. Have fun in doing what you do. Drive to be financially independent so you can have fun. Don't be necessarily tied to a specific job because you have to. That's not the way, at least in my opinion, not the way you should live life. As it relates to other things, what's on my mind is really nation states and their attack vectors and structures that are becoming more and more visible now. I think, if you talk about nation state subsidiaries, if you will, or funded action-oriented attackers being combined together, I think that becomes a problem. And because of that, I think we as corporate professionals, security professionals, we need to collaborate a lot more. We need to address, information sharing. We need to stop keyholing information just for our own use, and we need to share a lot of things across multiple sectors. And I think we need to shore up our manufacturing structures as it relates to security of IoT and OT areas. Those things keep me awake at night because now I got a refrigerator that talks to me. Well, what's it recording? Is it recording? Is there enough, memory on a chipset now that, an application that's part of a refrigerator can be, storing a bunch of data that's recording and be able to send that out somehow? Those concern me as we get more and more advanced, and security has a part in that to make society more secure. So.
Thank you so much, John. It's been a real pleasure. I know you said don't hit me up on LinkedIn and expect an acceptance, but if people do want to engage with you, pick your brain, how should they approach you?
Yeah, I think certainly, I was somewhat tongue in cheek about that. If you're gonna hit me up on LinkedIn, please just don't send me an invite. Send me a note inside that invite to say, "Hey, I heard you on the podcast. I'd like to make some time or get some time with you if possible," and I will respond the best I can. And if it's something that I'm really interested in, I may reach out and say, "Yeah, my assistant will set up some time." I have a global responsibility. My days are about 16 hours long. I go from one geographic area to the other every 24 hours. So, it's very difficult to get time. So please make a good case in your request to connect. And, I may answer it right away. It may take me a few days.
Great. Well, thank you again so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today on Cybersecurity Heroes. And to the rest of you, we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.